Almost everyone getting up at night blames their bladder. It's the easiest explanation, and honestly, it's the one I hear from almost every patient who sits down across from me. But for most people over 50, the real problem starts somewhere you'd never think to look, sometimes 8 or 9 hours before bedtime, and it has almost nothing to do with your bladder at all. By the end of this video, you're going to know exactly which of three mistakes is keeping you up tonight, and the third one is the mistake doctors miss most often, the one that explains why some people keep waking up even after they've fixed everything else on this list. If you've already tried cutting back on water, already tried the usual advice, and you're still lying awake wondering why nothing has changed, I think you're going to feel a little different by the time we get there. I've spent years helping older adults work through exactly this problem, sitting across the table from men and women in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, exhausted not because they're sick, but because their sleep keeps getting broken apart by trip after trip to the bathroom. I've seen this hundreds of times, and the same three mistakes show up again and again in almost the same order. Once we fix them, in the right order, most people notice a difference within a week, sometimes faster than that. Stay with me all the way through because Carol taught me the first mistake. Frank taught me the third, and the second one, sitting quietly in between, is the one almost everyone watching this right now is making without realizing it. I say that with confidence because I've watched it play out with patient after patient, year after year, and it never stops surprising people how simple the fix actually is once they see it clearly. Before we get into it, if you like real doctor-backed health information made specifically for adults over 60, without the scare tactics and without the confusing jargon, consider subscribing to Prime Health Insight. We publish a video like this every week, and I promise you'll walk away from each one with something you can actually use, not just something to feel anxious about. Now let's get into it, starting with a woman I'll call Carol. I want to pause for just a moment before we get to her story, because I know what it's like to sit in a waiting room feeling like you've already tried everything. Maybe you've already cut back on coffee. Maybe you've already stopped drinking after dinner. Maybe you've talked to a friend who swore by some trick that never quite worked for you. If that's where you are right now, I want you to know that's actually a good sign, not a discouraging one, because it usually means the answer isn't more willpower or more restriction. It's almost always something you simply haven't been told yet. Something small enough that once you hear it, it seems almost too simple to have been the answer all along. That was exactly true for Carol. Carol was 68, a retired teacher living just outside Columbus, Ohio. When she first came to see me, she told me she'd been waking up at almost exactly 1 a.m., then again around 3:30 a.m., every single night for nearly 3 months. She kept a little notepad by her bed just to track it because she wanted to be able to show me the pattern instead of just describing it from memory. She was doing everything she thought was right. Water cut off after 7 p.m. No coffee past noon. She'd even started avoiding soup at dinner just in case. And she still wasn't sleeping. By the time she came to see me, she told me she'd started dreading bedtime itself because she already knew how the night was going to go. So I asked her one question, and her answer genuinely surprised me because it had nothing to do with water and nothing to do with her bladder at all. I didn't ask her how much water she was drinking. I asked her where she spent her afternoons. She looked at me a little puzzled, the way most of my patients do when I ask that question, because it seems completely unrelated. But she answered honestly. Every day after lunch, it turned out Carol sat in her recliner for 2, sometimes 3 hours, reading or watching television, feet down, legs relaxed. Nothing unusual about that at all. It's exactly what most of us do, and exactly what most of us have been doing for decades without a second thought. That single, completely ordinary habit was the missing piece, and it's mistake number 1. Here's the strange part. When you sit for long stretches with your legs down, gravity quietly pulls fluid out of your bloodstream and into the tissue of your lower legs. You might not even notice it happening. Maybe your socks leave a little more of a mark than usual by evening. Maybe your shoes feel slightly tighter. Maybe you notice absolutely nothing at all, which is actually the most common case. But that fluid is sitting there, building up all afternoon, waiting. Picture your legs like a sponge sitting in a shallow puddle all afternoon, quietly soaking things up without looking any different on the outside. You wouldn't necessarily know a sponge was full just by glancing at it. Then the moment you lie flat to sleep, gravity lets go, and that sponge gets squeezed. All at once, that fluid moves back into your bloodstream. Your kidneys suddenly think you've been drinking all evening, even though you haven't touched a glass in hours, and they respond the only way they know how, by producing more urine right when you're trying to sleep. There's real research behind this, and it's not just something we say to make people feel better about not being able to control it. A small clinical study of older adults with leg swelling had them elevate their legs before bed for 2 weeks, and it measurably improved both their swelling and how well they slept through that first stretch of the night. Compression stockings, worn during the day, can help with the same underlying issue for people who spend a lot of time on their feet or sitting still. For Carol, the fix wasn't cutting her water further, and it certainly wasn't giving up her afternoon shows. It was elevating her legs for 20 to 30 minutes in the late afternoon, propped above heart level on a couple of pillows, ideally sometime between 3 and 6 in the afternoon, so the fluid has time to redistribute well before bed. We didn't change a single thing about how much she drank. 2 weeks later, she came back with her little notepad and told me she'd gone from waking twice a night to sleeping straight through most nights. Her husband mentioned to me himself that he was sleeping better too, simply because she wasn't climbing out of bed anymore, and he wasn't half waking every time she did. A few of my patients have asked me why this seems to affect people over 50 so much more than it did when they were younger. Part of it is simply that the veins in our legs lose some of their elasticity with age, so they're a little less efficient at pushing fluid back up toward the heart during the day, which gives it more of a chance to pool in the first place. Part of it is that we tend to sit more as we get older, whether that's from joint pain, retirement, or just different daily routines than we had decades ago. And part of it, especially for people managing blood pressure or heart conditions, comes down to certain medications that can make this fluid shifting more pronounced. None of that means anything is wrong with you. It simply means your body is behaving exactly the way an older body behaves. And once you understand that, the leg elevation habit stops feeling like a strange workaround and starts feeling like common sense. Has anyone ever told you this before, that where you sit in the afternoon could affect how you sleep at night? Just answer yes or no in the comments. I'm genuinely curious how many people are hearing this for the first time, because in my experience, it's the vast majority. Because here's the thing, even after fixing this, Carol still wasn't making the biggest mistake on this list. Not even close. There was something else waiting underneath. Something almost every one of us does without a second thought. Something so ordinary that most people would never think to question it. And it's mistake number 2. Before we get there, let me ask you something else. How many times are you personally getting up at night right now, on average? Type the number in the comments, just the number. I read every one of these, and when you see how many other people are typing 3 and 4 right there with you, it changes how you feel about this. You are not broken, and you are absolutely not alone. This is one of the most common complaints I hear in my practice, right up there with joint pain and fatigue, and yet almost nobody talks about it openly, which is a shame, because talking about it is often the first step toward actually fixing it. Now, mistake number 2, and here's the strange part about this one. When I started looking at my patients' evening habits instead of just how much water they drank, I noticed something that surprised even me. Most people don't actually drink too much across the whole day. If you add up everything, morning coffee, lunch, snacks, dinner, the total is usually perfectly reasonable, sometimes even a little on the low side. The mistake is when that water shows up and what's riding along with it. Think about a typical evening. A big glass with dinner, maybe iced tea if it's warm out. A cup of decaf afterward out of habit, because it feels like part of the routine. One more glass by the bed because someone once told you hydration before sleep is healthy, or because you saw it in a magazine years ago and it stuck. By the time your head hits the pillow, your kidneys have a full workload right when your body should be winding down, not ramping up for another shift. Front-loading fluids earlier in the day solved this for most of my patients without them ever feeling deprived. A solid glass when you wake up, since you're naturally a little dehydrated after a night's sleep anyway. Steady hydration through the morning and into early afternoon. Then a gentle taper, starting somewhere in the 4 to 6 hours before bed. This isn't about restricting water, and I want to say that clearly because restricting fluids too aggressively, especially for adults over 60, can actually be dangerous, leading to dehydration, dizziness, and confusion, particularly in warm weather or if you're on certain medications. If you're genuinely thirsty at night, you drink. Thirst is your body being honest with you. What we're changing is the glass you reach for out of habit, not thirst. The one that's really just part of a routine rather than something your body is actually asking for. But here's the part that genuinely surprised me the first time I understood it fully, and it's the kind of thing that changes how people think about their evening routine for good. That glass of wine with dinner doesn't just make you produce more urine, the way most people assume. It actually blocks the hormone your body relies on to stay asleep through the night, the same one whose entire job is concentrating your urine so you don't wake up as often. That hormone's natural production already declines somewhat with age. Quietly, without you noticing, and alcohol pushes it down even further right when you need it most. So the wine that helps you drift off faster is often the very thing dragging you out of bed at 2 a.m., and most people never make that connection because the wine happened hours earlier and feels completely unrelated by the time they're standing in the bathroom half asleep. Caffeine works against you the same quiet way. Coffee, black tea, green tea, even certain sodas, nudging your kidneys into overdrive and making your bladder itself more sensitive, often 9 or 10 hours after your last sip, long after you've forgotten you ever had it. You don't have to give either one up completely. For most people, that isn't necessary or realistic. Just shift the timing. Caffeine earlier in the day, wine with an earlier dinner instead of right before bed, and watch what a single week of that small change does to your nights. There's one more piece of this that catches people off guard, and it has nothing to do with what you drink at all. It's what you eat, especially late in the evening. Salty foods cause your body to hold on to extra water throughout the day, which then has to go somewhere overnight, often adding to the same fluid shifting we talked about with Carol. Watery, high liquid foods late at night, soups, melons, big salads with dressing, add to your evening fluid load in ways that are easy to forget about because you're not sipping from a glass. None of this means you need to overhaul your diet. It simply means that if you've already fixed your drinking habits and you're still waking up, it's worth glancing at what a typical dinner plate looks like and whether it's quietly adding to the very problem you're trying to solve. Now, here it is, the mistake I've been building to this whole time, the one I promised you at the very beginning. For years, I had patients who fixed the legs, fixed the timing, cut back on caffeine and wine, and were still waking up 2 or 3 times a night no matter what we tried. It frustrated me, genuinely, because I knew we were missing something, and I couldn't always put my finger on what. It frustrated me, until everything changed because of someone who wasn't even my patient. Let me tell you about a man I'll call Frank. Frank was 71, a retired mechanic, the kind of guy who fixed everything himself and didn't love coming to the doctor in the first place. He'd been getting up 4, sometimes 5 times a night for over a year. He'd already tried everything we just covered, the legs, the timing, cutting back on his evening beer. Nothing worked. At one visit, exhausted and a little defeated, he looked at me and said, "Doctor, I don't even care about getting older anymore. I just want one night where I don't see my own bathroom." That kind of honesty stays with you. That's when his wife, sitting quietly in the corner of the room the way she did at every appointment, mentioned almost offhandedly that Frank snored so loudly some nights she slept in the guest room, and that she'd noticed him stop breathing for a few seconds at a time before gasping awake, something she'd almost gotten used to and never thought to bring up on her own. I remember sitting there for a second after she said it, because Frank himself hadn't mentioned any of that, not because he was hiding it, but because in his mind, snoring was just something men his age did. Background noise, not a medical clue. That's actually incredibly common. Most people never connect how they sleep to how often they wake up to urinate, because the two seem to belong to completely different parts of the body. One feels like a bladder issue, the other feels like just a noisy night. It rarely occurs to anyone that the second one might be quietly causing the first. That single detail changed everything. Frank was living with undiagnosed sleep apnea, and he had been for years, probably longer than either of us realized. When breathing repeatedly stops and starts through the night, it places real strain on the heart. In response, the heart releases a hormone that increases urine production. An attempt to ease that pressure and reduce the extra fluid volume the heart is straining to handle. It's the body doing exactly what it's supposed to do, just in response to the wrong problem. Nearly 3 out of every 4 people with sleep apnea also get up at night to urinate, a connection that almost nobody outside of sleep medicine ever hears about. Frank wasn't waking up because of his bladder. His bladder was simply following orders from a heart working overtime, all night, every night, for years, without either of them knowing why. Once Frank started treatment for his sleep apnea, his nighttime trips dropped dramatically within weeks. 3 months later, he laughed at a follow-up appointment and told me the light bulb in his bathroom might burn out from old age before he ever needs to replace it again. What happened with Frank changed the way I look at nighttime urination forever, because it taught me that the most common mistake isn't really about water at all. It's assuming this has to be a bladder problem in the first place, when so often your body is sending a signal from somewhere else entirely, and that assumption is exactly what lets people quietly suffer through it for years instead of asking why, the way Frank did before his wife happened to mention one small detail. In men, an enlarged prostate, extremely common as men move through their 50s, 60s, and beyond, can press against the urethra and create that same urgent feeling even when the bladder isn't particularly full. In women, pelvic floor changes after menopause, tied to dropping estrogen levels, can reduce bladder capacity and control in ways that have nothing to do with how much fluid is actually inside. And for both men and women, sleep apnea, heart function, and certain medications, especially those taken later in the day, can all be quietly driving the very symptom you've been blaming entirely on your bladder for years. I want to be honest with you about something important here, because I never want to leave you with the impression that every case is this simple. Most of the time, what we've covered today, fluid redistribution in the legs, evening timing, caffeine, and alcohol, explains the majority of nighttime bathroom trips in people over 50. And those fixes are genuinely simple, often achievable within a week or two without any medication at all. But if you've already adjusted your habits and you're still waking up multiple times every night, or you're noticing snoring, gasping, unexplained swelling that doesn't go down, or unusual thirst alongside it, that's worth its own conversation with your doctor, not something to quietly manage alone for another year, the way Frank did before his wife's comment finally cracked the case open. It's also worth mentioning that when you do bring this up with your doctor, there's more they can offer than you might expect. A simple review of your medication list and timing, especially if you're on a diuretic, can make a meaningful difference just by shifting a morning dose earlier. Pelvic floor exercises, done consistently, can noticeably help both men and women with bladder control over time. And for people whose nighttime urine production is genuinely the main driver, there are medications a doctor can discuss that help the body hold on to that overnight concentrating ability we talked about earlier. None of this is meant to overwhelm you. It's meant to reassure you that if leg elevation and evening timing alone don't fully solve it, you are not out of options, not even close. So, before you blame your bladder tonight, ask yourself 3 questions. Where did you spend your afternoon, sitting with your legs down for hours or up and moving around periodically? What did you drink in the last few hours before bed, and honestly, was it out of thirst or simply out of habit? And has anyone who sleeps near you ever mentioned your snoring, your breathing, or your restlessness at night, even in passing, even as a joke? Your honest answers to those 3 questions will tell you more than almost anything else we could cover today, and they cost you nothing but a moment of thought. Carol thought the answer was drinking less. Frank thought it was simply getting older, something to quietly accept the way so many of us are taught to accept the small losses that come with age. Both were wrong, And the real answer for each of them turned out to be closer and simpler than either of them expected. Tell me honestly in the comments, which of these three hit closest to home for you? The legs, the evening habits, or the assumption that it was always your bladder? I read these, and I genuinely like to know which one you're going to try first tonight. And if this video helped you see your own nights a little more clearly, send it along to someone who needs it, because someone you love is probably getting up tonight for this exact same reason, and they just don't know it yet. Sometimes the most caring thing you can do for someone isn't sympathy, it's simply handing them an answer. Imagine opening your eyes tomorrow morning, looking over at the clock, and realizing that the sun is already coming in through the window, because for the first time in longer than you can remember, you never got up once. No trip down the hallway in the dark, no lying there afterward, wide awake, doing the math on how many hours of sleep you have left. Just a full, uninterrupted night, the kind you may have quietly assumed was gone for good, something that belonged to a younger version of yourself, rather than something still within reach. That's what I want for you starting tonight, not someday, not after you've suffered through it for another year the way Frank did before one small comment finally cracked the case open. You don't need to fix all three mistakes at once. Pick the one that sounded the most like you, whichever one made you quietly nod along, and start there tonight. Small, specific changes, tried consistently for a week or two, tell you far more than any amount of worrying ever will. You've spent decades taking care of everyone around you, showing up for your family, your work, the people who depended on you. You deserve a full night's rest just as much as anyone, and it is still well within reach. I'll see you in the next video, and until then, take care of yourself and sleep well.